Hi everyone! In today's video, I'll be sharing the process as well as some art tips that I used in creating this spread from my Animal Habitat art series. Now this is the 7th piece from my Animal Habitat art series, Rainforest Animals. So in this spread, I've got 26 animals and I just want to share some of the tips that I've used and the process that I've used in creating these spreads. There are still a further 3 more to go before the entire series is complete. Okay, so starting off, when I do any of these spreads, it is done on an A4 sketchbook on both pages because I've got 26 animals, so I need quite a big amount of space. So one page was not enough. I needed a 2-page spread. So I've got the animals laid out on both pages. So when I start off the initial drawing, I first look at all my reference photos according to a list of all animals that I want to include. Once I've got my reference photos and I've got my list, I look at all the largest animals and I place them onto the spread around the entire spread. I'm not trying to put them all into one corner or to one part of the spread. I try to put them across both pages, all the largest animals. Remember, I'm not trying to depict them for the actual size. I just want to depict them as the animal, represent the animal as an illustration and a drawing that's realistic and that you can really see that that's the animal I'm drawing. So what I do is I place all the largest animals across the spread evenly so that there's space in between them. Then I move on to the list with the medium animals or medium-sized animals, which I know are going to be depicted a bit smaller, and I put them on. Like for example, the larger animals with the elephant, the crocodile, the okapi, those are all panda bear, those are all the largest animals that I placed first when I did the initial sketching in water-soluble graphite. Then I moved on to drawing the medium-sized animals, which is like the iguana and maybe the macaws, the parrots. I drew those in, and then I keep the smallest animals, which is like the butterflies, the beetles, the insects, maybe the little hummingbirds, smaller depictions, or those animals are going to be drawn much smaller, and I place them on the spread as well. Now those I basically place them in the areas where I have got blank spaces according to which area. If it's a bigger area, I put the little bigger ones in there. If it's a smaller sketch or smaller illustration, I include it in the smaller areas. But that takes a while. The initial sketches are all done in water-soluble graphite pencil, just so that I don't have any harsh lines, and I'm also keeping a light hand as well, just so that it makes it easier when I'm adding the Inktense, as just using this as a guideline. Now, as I said before, it's very important to get the proportions of the animals right, the textures, the areas where are going to be the shadow areas, or the legs, the eyes, the ears, all of that placement has to be accurate as possible, or as accurate as possible, in order for your final piece to represent the animal correctly and for the animal to look realistic and not have any problems with misalignment of eyes or anything like that. So once I do the initial sketch of the animal, I start working with my Inktense pencils. Now I go through the piece or each animal, looking at the reference photo. Once they're all placed on the spread, I go animal by animal and I work one at a time. And I do start off using the darker colors for the details and the shadow areas of each animal, and then I start working and building up the other colors or the other tones or the other values of the fur or texture of the fur, if it's fur or if it's scales or feathers, depending on which animal I'm drawing. So once I add all those colors in, then I would go through with a brown brush with a little bit of water. I do have a paper towel that I keep on the side just to make sure my brush is clean between every color, as well as make sure the brush doesn't have too much water on it. Then I apply the water to activate the ink of the Inktense pencils after I have enough pencil on, or have enough of the colors that I need to have on my paper. Once I have all of the color down, then I go in with the water. Once the first layer is done, I let it dry before putting another layer. Each animal has got multiple layers. I'm building up the shadows, I'm retaining the highlighted areas. So it's important to work slowly and also pay close attention to your reference photo, because you need to see where the shadow areas are in order for your drawing to look realistic and more three-dimensional and correctly depict the animal that you are representing with the illustration. So I work with layer by layer, but sometimes if I want to, for example, have you have a very wiry hair texture of hair or fur, it's good to use the pencils or the Inktense pencils without activating it with water. So this will be the final step. I will not be adding water. Once all the layers that I've added water are done, I'll go in with just the pencil dry and not add any water, just to create that texture that I'm looking for, that rough texture or even smooth texture. It depends on what you're trying to achieve and the type of fur or feathers or texture you're trying to achieve. So I go through with the pencil dry, and that will be my final layer, and I will not activate it with water or try to blend it with water. Another thing to pay close attention to is when you are applying the water, try to keep your brush clean between every color. You can start either way. You can either start by going over the lighter areas and working your way to the darker areas, or start over the darker areas and then go to your lighter areas. Just make sure between each layer or each color you are washing your brush out, rinsing it out, and wiping it up quite well on the paper towel, so that you just have a damp brush and not using a really soaking brush with a lot of water, because that can put too much water down and it can spread on the paper and it can go into areas from the dark to light. For example, with the macaw parrot that I just did a little while ago, you'll see his area by the throat area is very dark. It's almost black to dark gray. If I do put a lot of water, or if I move from that area to the yellow area, I'm going to spread over the black into the yellow, and it's going to make it look muddy, and it's not going to look like the actual yellow color that I want it to be vibrant like it is and saturated as it is. So it's important to keep your colors separate, and basically rinse out your brush between each color and wipe out as much of the water as possible. Then another thing I also had when I was working on these pieces is, initially I didn't want to include any additional elements besides the animals themselves. And what I realized by doing that, if you don't include some of the elements, you're not going to get the animal to look realistic the way it's supposed to look. For example, the green tree boa that I drew, if I didn't have the branch that he's on, you will just think he's floating in mid-air like a little green blob. You will not actually see what he's actually coiled around. So it's important to include sometimes certain elements from the reference photo, just so that your drawing makes sense and your illustration looks better. Like even the birds, if I don't, or in the previous page I did a jaguar, he's laying on rocks. If I just drew him with these front legs like just hanging with no rock, you wouldn't know that his front legs are hanging over the rock. You will actually think he's just in mid-air, and his pose won't make sense until I drew those rocks in. So it's important sometimes, depending on the angle of the animal or the type of reference photo you're using, to just bear in mind that you may need to include certain elements from that reference photo into your final piece, and not just the animal themselves. So now when it comes to the highlighted parts of the animals, like the shine of the eye, or the little glint of shine on the eye, or if the fur has little white areas that you covered up with the Inktense, you can use, depending on the opacity you need. If you need something very opaque, then you can use a white paint pen, and if you need something that's a little translucent and transparent, you can maybe use a gel pen and then dab it with your finger. If you need it to be a bit more transparent, if you need thin lines, you can use a gel white pen or a white jelly roll pen, just to get that highlights in the eyes and certain areas on the body as well. If you have an area that you need to make lighter, even you can use that to create or to correct an error. If you see there's an area you went over white area with, or lighter area with a darker color, go over with a little bit of the pen, let it dry, and then go over with the correct color pencil that you're supposed to use. So you can use that as well if you have a mistake or an highlight to show on your final piece or on the illustration that you're drawing. So white jelly roll pen is good, a white gel pen, or even just a white paint pen. That's fine if you want really opaque areas in the larger area to cover. Now, when you're drawing, you don't have to include or work on a full animal at once. Like you see now with the scarlet macaw, I did the red area, went over it with the water, moved on to the next area. After I've worked section by section, I will come back through, go over the shadow areas, add more shadows as necessary. I don't use black for shadows. I usually use either a darker version of the color that the shadow falls in, or a gray or a blue. That makes it much more realistic and three-dimensional. If I just colored everything with just the green, the blue of the Scarlet Macaw, that is, if I just used the red, the green, the blue, and I didn't have the definition of the shadows in between the feathers, it'll look very flat and won't look very three-dimensional and won't look very realistic. So these are not supposed to be super hyper-realistic drawings or illustrations, but they're supposed to be realistic enough that you can identify the animal and they look three-dimensional and they don't look flat or like a cartoon. Which you can see, they don't look like cartoon characters. They actually look like the actual animals, and that's the aim that I had when I was drawing this piece or doing these spreads, is that I want to represent as many of the animals in the world as possible on these spreads according to their habitat that they live in, or the type of habitats that they live in. So another thing to remember is when you are drawing, try to keep, or coloring in, try to keep a piece of paper underneath the palm of your hand. It can be either a piece of printer paper, blank printer paper sheet, or maybe even you can use tracing paper. You can use tracing paper, keep a sheet underneath your hand, just so that as you're drawing or as you're coloring, you don't smudge any of the drawings or anything with your palm of your hand. As well as if you've got, like in this case, like now I'm working on the gorilla, I've got the tiger next door. If I drag my hand over the tiger drawing, that because it's water soluble graphite pencil, it's going to actually remove some of that sketch that I did initially, which will mean I have to go back and re-sketch certain areas. So just to avoid and save time and avoid redoing something, keep it underneath your hand just so that you don't smudge anything. If there's areas where there's wet ink, it may smudge and ink doesn't remove, so it's going to basically destroy your entire spread, because you're going to keep looking at that smudge and say, okay, I destroyed the spread. So it's important to keep that in mind and keep that piece of paper or tracing paper under your hand, just so that as you're working, and also try not to move that paper as well, because that can also smudge if it's wet. Another thing also to remember is when you're done with these kind of spreads, try to keep a sheet of paper between each page. Like this is a double spread, so if you close it together, keep a piece of paper between them so that the drawing on the left or the right, there won't be any smudging onto the opposite side or the opposite page, and you won't have any sometimes if there is a bit of ink with sweat, or even if using any other medium, it does spread from one page to another if it's kept closed in the book form. So try to keep something to separate, or piece of paper, tracing paper, something in between, just so that you separate the pages. So I guess that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it helpful. If you have, don't forget to like and share. Feel free to comment below, and don't forget to subscribe. Till the next one. Bye.